welcome to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum's monthly virtual movie discussion night. My name's Eric. I'm the education specialist at the museum, and I'd like to just welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up. Before we get started, I would like to say a special thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support, as well as our sponsor, Generac Power Systems. Without those two organizations, we would not be able to do all the free programming that we get to do and have these huge audiences that we have, event in and event out. And I make light of that. This is the lowest amount of people we've ever had at a virtual event. So, but nonetheless, we're still carrying on. We still all watch the movie. The movie that we're discussing this month is the 2010 Australian production of Beneath Hills 60. As I said, Australian production, so I'm not familiar at all with any of the people that worked on this film or acted in this film. It was directed by Jeremy Sims, who started out as an Australian actor and then decided to open his own production company. He has put out a few good films in Australia, and that's what landed him this gig. And also cinematographer Toby Oliver. And we'll talk a little bit more about their roles as we look at the tunnels and everything that they built. The cinematography for Toby Oliver, there's a few films that I did recognize. Not that I've seen any of the Insidious movies, but he has worked on the Insidious films, as well as the recent hit Get Out, which I have not seen either. And then the Motley Crue documentary that was on Netflix called The Dirt. He worked on that one as well. I did see that one. I rather enjoyed it. I'm a Motley Crue fan. This movie stars Brendan Cowell as Oliver Woodward, and it was a joy seeing him for the first time. I thought he was a fine actor, and I can't wait to talk about his role. But I did not recognize any of his filmography at all, except for his upcoming work on Avatar 2. So I'm looking forward to that as an Avatar fan, and now a closet Brendan Cowell fan. Hugo Weaving was actually supposed to play that part of Oliver Woodward, but he's a very claustrophobic person, and after he saw what it would entail with the tunnel work, he decided to decline and not do this piece, probably for a smart move on his part. Also stars Bella Heathcote, who played Marjorie, and I've seen her before in Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. Not the greatest film out there, but it was a lot of fun, I thought, for a zombie film. Principal for photography was done in late July of 2009. Took about 40 days to shoot this film, and they filmed it primarily on a farmer's field. They bought a few acres of this farmer's field and turned it into the World War I zone. And then for the tunnels themselves, they built all those tunnels in an airport hangar, and they filmed all the tunnel scenes, in this hangar specifically, built for the scene. So I was looking for photographs of what that set might look like. I couldn't find any. I thought that would have been interesting. It was supposed to be released on Anzac Day, which is April 25th. In the year 2010, Anzac Day is every April 25th, though. But it was released 10 days earlier on April 15th. I couldn't find out a reason why they couldn't hold off for another 10 days. Maybe it was because of production costs and they were ready to start making money. It was released here in the US on June 28th of 2011, so more than a full year later, distributed by Paramount Pictures. And speaking of the making money part, this film is on the list of a few films that we've showed that didn't make any money really. I had a budget of about 5 million US dollars, about 8 million Australian, and it was a box office total of about 3.5 million American. So they lost money on this, and it's a shame too, because I rather liked the film. I thought it was a pretty good film. Chris, what did you think of the
film? I liked it. It was a bit different from some of the other ones we've seen. I think World War I movies we've seen, in the sense that I thought it was kind of slower in many respects than others we've seen. But one thing that struck me, particularly in the early scenes when they're down the tunnel, reminded me in many ways of the movie Das Boot. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
When they're in the submarine.
In the submarine, the German submarine, because it was so claustrophobic there, very tight, not like, the submarines in, say, Hunt for Red October, where people can wander around and, it's almost like a movie set. So the very tight focus on those underground tunnels was really, I thought, extraordinary particularly knowing that they were built on a set. You know, it looks so realistic. Um, the other thing that struck me that was similar to Das Boot was in the submarine movie, you know, you always had to be quiet because somebody might hear you.
Oh, yeah.
And you had the same thing here where they're listening in the tunnels with the stethoscope and the devices. So thinking about those two movies together was kind of interesting to me. I thought the flashback part worked pretty well too, which often it doesn't. So overall, I liked it a lot. I won't say it's my favorite picture, but it was a surprisingly good one for, you know, not having really any expectations about it.
Right. And it's interesting how you bring up the Das Boot factor. I hadn't considered that. This was the first film that I actually watched at work and not here at home. And I don't think I'm going to do that again. I think I was too distracted with other things, and I couldn't really give it my full attention like I would at home, and maybe watch it a couple times. So yeah, I hadn't thought of the Das Boot factor at all, but you're right. Now that you mention it, the closed confined spaces, the sound, you know, how intimate everybody has to be with each other because there's just nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
Lisa,
and they're German. And they were German too.
I'm sorry?
In Das Boot, they were German.
Lots of subtitles in that movie.
Right.
Lisa, how'd you like the movie?
I really liked it.
Good.
I liked it a lot. And I think that what Chris said, like it was slow. I just saw Top Gun Maverick. Did you guys see it yet?
Not yet.
Okay, then I won't. But I'll tell you the beginning of, I took my dad for Father's Day. So I saw the beginning of it and I was just like, oh my God, this is so slow. Why does everybody like this? And this didn't feel that way to me. It felt more methodical, and it felt like it had to be methodical because, you know, they're making little headway. But I really liked it a lot.
Excellent. So we start off the movie. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, like I said, I only saw it once, and that was at work. They start off the movie, and they're not quite at World War I yet. Oliver Woodward has just come back from a mining operation, and he comes and surprises this family. I'm not sure what the connection is. Maybe if he's just interested in Marjorie, and that's where the family connection is. I'm not sure why this family is so tight with Oliver. They didn't really explain that very well. At least if they did, I missed it. But Oliver comes home and he's at the dinner table with his family. And I found it kind of striking that one of the first topics that they breach is, you know, whether to sign up or not. And I can't speak for Australia. Here in the US, you know, it was a no-brainer. If you were signing up, particularly in World War II, but especially in World War I as well, you did see that sense of not only pride, but you felt you had to go out and do this. This is something that needed to be done. And so I'm just curious what everybody's thoughts are on that scene in particular. There's a couple questions associated with it, such as why is he not joining up right away? And what are some of the sentiments that are expressed by the family members, which in turn, you know, just kind of encapsulates maybe a national sentiment on his decision not to sign up and his response to not signing up. He seems rather not happy about it, but he's content with that choice, I thought.
Well, I thought my recollection is that he was asked not to join because he had some mining responsibilities.
Right. Yeah. His responsibilities at home were, you know, they outweighed the needs of him on the battlefield.
And that the mining work he was doing was contributing to the war. It involved mining materials that would be used in military operation. I don't know, ammunition or something like that. So I had a sense that, to a certain extent, that he thought he was already contributing in that regard. The sense that I got at that table was that there were kind of mixed responses to what he was doing. He got that little package of feathers, you know, indicating that he was, you know, a coward.
Right.
chicken, yeah. And I think the paterfamilias was thought that he was being a chicken, but I didn't get the sense that the others necessarily felt that, and particularly Marjorie. I mean, she didn't want him to go.
Sure.
So there were kind of mixed reactions. It kind of reminded me a little bit of when I came home and I told my parents I was going to enlist at the height of the Vietnam War. And I remember my mother's face just going, completely like drained blood out of it. And my dad, wasn't cheering me on or anything like that, but he was more, I don't know, sort of accepting of that. I mean, having been in World War II. And I had a similar kind of feeling about the folks that were around the table there.
Sally, how are you? You're muted. There you go.
Sorry, I almost forgot again.
So just to catch you up, we just got started and we're just talking about the opening scene where Oliver Woodward, Lieutenant Woodward, has not yet joined up. He's still a civilian. He's just come back from this mining operation, and he's sitting around the dinner table with his family that includes Marjorie, his future wife. And when we're talking about, the sentiment at the time about, either to join or not to join, and the reasons behind that, and how each decision or each choice is perceived, not only by your friends and your family, but by the people that live around you, and nationally too. There's always that sentiment of, to contribute, especially if you look at England during World War I, during this time. What is it? The king expects every man will do his duty, or something like that. You were almost not forced to sign up, but you sure were made to seem ashamed if you didn't. And Chris was just talking about, when they were sitting there, he had that jar of feathers that he, kept receiving feathers, and he kept them as kind of like, I don't know, inspiration or motivation, perhaps. So yeah, we're just talking about that, what it was like during this time, to join or to not join, and how you make those decisions. Chris was saying, and obviously, we've seen the film, that he was actually contributing to the war effort through his civilian job, and that's why he was not joining up. He was more needed at home, until, of course, he has to report. But Lisa, what did you think about, the decisions that he's making there, and how everybody else is looking at him?
Well, honestly, I because I realized that I hadn't signed up for events. I signed up late, so I got your information late. So I didn't really focus on that scene that much.
Okay.
But now, was it their son who was?
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, they did. They had a son who was killed in action over in Europe at the time. I'd forgotten about that. Thanks for bringing that up. And if I remember correctly, they just got that letter maybe that day, or right around the time that he had shown back up, Woodward. So yeah, that certainly was something that was on their minds as they were discussing this, wasn't it?
So he did die. I thought when he got the letter, they were very somber and everything, and then the father said something about Gallipoli, and I didn't know if he was just sent to this place or if he actually had died.
Yeah, no, Gallipoli was a disaster for the Anzacs. It was a really good plan. It wasn't executed very well. If I'm not mistaken, they were landed in the wrong place, and they're fighting against the Turks at this time, and it just turned out spectacularly terrible for the Australians. So it
wouldn't have just been a bad place to be sent, because it
was a bad place to be sent, but it
devolved really fast. So it wouldn't have been people went, oh, they went to Gallipoli. It's like once people learned they were in Gallipoli, it was like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it. Now I understand. And I think that there was a little bit, but they didn't come out and say it. But they did keep talking about the son, and I think that I think he felt a little bit, yes, I'm here, and these are my reasons, but then they're talking about their son being gone. So it's like, maybe I'm not doing it. I felt I felt it didn't say it or anything, but I felt it was in his back of his mind, like maybe I'm not doing enough.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned the son as well, you look at the relationship that Woodward has with this family. I guess, in a sense, he could be considered, not necessarily a biological son, but he's very close to this family. They could tell, or we could tell. So maybe perhaps as well that they're thinking in the back of their mind, well, we already lost one very close family member. It sure would be a shame to maybe lose somebody else who's close to us as well. And maybe that's why, especially like Chris was saying, the father of the family, he didn't come right out and say it, but you could tell that he kind of had some mixed feelings as to join or not join. And maybe that played into those emotions.
I just have to say, of the movies we've watched, I did not care for this one at all.
Oh,
I had trouble following it and tracking it. It was just not my cup of tea, and I can't tell you why. It just did not get me.
no, there's lots of times when I've seen movies that everybody's raving about, and it's not particularly a bad movie. It's just, like you said, it wasn't your cup of tea. Quentin Tarantino's last movie, it won Academy Awards. Everybody loved it. It had all the best actors. And I love Tarantino. I love Brad Pitt. I love everything all together. But it wasn't my cup of tea. I just didn't care for it.
Oh, that was one of the worst. Oh, bad. I'm not a Tarantino fan, but that was not a good movie to me. But anywho.
Yeah, so don't feel bad about not being able to explain why you don't like it.
Yeah. I also didn't get your questions this time for some oddball reason.
All right. Okay. I'll make a note of that. As soon as I get done, I don't have a pen with me, but I'll make a note of that. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah. And I'm so excited. I got a Fire Stick and hooked it up. So I'm getting all these oddball movies. Right in my home TV.
Well, maybe now you can peruse your movie selection and make a few recommendations.
That isn't going to happen. Not about war movies.
So, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. One of the questions I had about the sort of relationship with the Australians in this whole thing was with how strongly did Australia really feel about this? I mean, as part of the British Empire, I could understand that there was some interest, but I mean, this whole thing is taking place on the other side of the world, and it doesn't really extend out to the Pacific in any respect. So I was really kind of puzzled, or does it?
World War I was literally just like World War II. It was a world war. It was everywhere. Right. Now, you're right. I mean, this wasn't like, Japan, within 200 miles of the Australian coast as they're taking over on their island hopping campaign. But Gallipoli, I can't put a distance on it, but I know that's not too far removed from where Australia was, or is rather. And you're right, with the connection with the British Empire. And as a matter of fact, it struck me, and I wish I would have made a note, but I'm glad you mentioned it. The father of the family, he had a super thick Scottish accent. It was really thick. I was like, wow, what's a Scot doing in Australia? Oh yeah, it's
well,
part of the British Empire, but it's not too far removed either.
Yeah, well, with Australia, I don't know how long before this Australia had really been settled. I mean, it was a prison colony basically of the British Empire. So given that my sense was that a lot of the Anglos there would have been descended from prisoners who might not have been too happy about the British Empire as a result. So that was one of the things I wish there had been more development on, as to why there would be a strong sentiment to send Australians to Europe for the war.
Sure, no, and that makes sense. I'm not totally boned up on my section of World War I history as far as that's concerned, but I know that Australia did have a significant presence both in Europe and, for lack of a better term, Southeast or South Asia, Southwest Asia, whatever you would want to call it. As you move away from Eastern Europe, So I know they did have a significant presence. They did have a good contribution. But as far as, what made those ties and binds, I'm not quite sure. I wish I had a better answer for you. So once he gets to, Woodward gets to France, he is immediately down in his tunnel. And he's meeting his platoon. He's meeting his unit for the first time. How did that go?
Well, he came across Tiffin, who was fearful, and he kind of took him under his wing. And then he came across Fraser and his group, and Fraser's the character in the movie who's going to have animosity towards him. And I'm glad that I thought it was a good balance of how they did it. It was for a certain amount of time, and then they set the scene and it broke, and then they were okay with each other. I don't like when it gets drawn out for so long. So I thought it was a very, very good balance. And then as time went, the camaraderie all came together, and it was a great little unit.
I'm curious. You kind of brought this question up in me, Lisa, and I had something similar written down, but now it's kind of taken on a new form. Did you think that Woodward was treated by his unit the same way that most officers are treated in movies when they first report to their unit? And kind of a second part to that question, I want to know everybody's thoughts. Do you think this film treated the platoon itself as the stereotypical platoon that we see? You have the religious guy, you have the comedian, you have the really serious guy, so on and so forth. Do you think that those two pieces were set up the way that we normally see them, or do you think this film maybe took a different tack and tried to show the characters in a different light and not the same stereotypical war movie platoon sort of thing?
In my limited perception of this movie, it seemed that they were considered an elitist platoon with special skills with the mining and that. So I thought they were treated almost like royalty. I don't know where I'm getting that from. It just felt like that when I, was watching it. In fact, I thought they were drafted by the government because of their skill sets. I don't know where I got that from.
Okay.
I thought that when Woodward first arrived, they were kind of standoffish to him. I mean, it's not in a lot of these movies, the new lieutenant is looked at with kind of contempt, but I don't think they looked at him with contempt. In part, I suspect because they knew he was a tunneler too. He was a miner. He wasn't somebody who came from some elite school, from a military academy, and had no experience with what they were doing. So I thought it was kind of interesting that in my perception, it wasn't the typical entrance for the new officer in charge. And I also thought that whatever the stereotypical characters might be in this, it really wasn't played up in the way that it is in so many other movies. It was kind of flattened out. So you were aware of it, but it really didn't play a big role in how these characters performed throughout the movie. The thing that struck me about Tiffin was that I kind of saw him as kind of a Billy Budd character out of Herman Melville's book. I mean, the innocent at war who ultimately dies, even though he's trying to do the right thing at the time. And I thought one of the things about Woodward that was kind of impressive was when he went into the officers' shelter the first time with Tiffin, and the whoever was the captain or the very officious officer there was saying, he doesn't belong here. I don't even think you belong here. So in a sense, I don't think that he was thought of as an elite, really. but more as an interloper almost, that he wasn't a real soldier because he wasn't out on the front lines.
Yeah, and there was even that line, Chris. I can't remember who said it, but they're talking about. Oh, no, actually, I think it was that very officious captain, and they were talking about Woodward's job as a tunneler. And he says, if you guys weren't even tunneling, the boss wouldn't be either, so we wouldn't have a need for all this at all. I kind of got the feeling that they didn't get as much respect as maybe they should have. And I like your take on the platoon itself. I think maybe Jeremy Sims realized that a lot of war movies just overplay that platoon angle where you have these individual characters and each have to fall into a certain stereotypical attitude, and he just kind of overlooked that altogether. And I thought that was kind of refreshing, to be honest.
I don't think there was any of that direct animosity. Typically the new officer who comes in is younger. The other people have been there for a while. They're kind of worn and ragged and experienced. And sure, Frazier gave them some tips when they broke through there. But I don't. It was just Frazier who was like kind of looking him up and down and like, yeah, this guy's gonna tell us what to do. But he kind of proved. I mean, he was already down in the tunnel, down by himself, getting dirty. But it was funny that he said he was lost.
And it's I was never there. I never went through any tunnels like that. But from everything I've read, it is not hard to get lost down in those places at all. And especially with the main tunnel that they were using to blow up the Messine Ridge, they were part German tunnels too. So they maybe weren't very mapped very well either. I'm sorry, I'd rather be going over the top than being down in those tunnels if I was in World War I. I couldn't be down there like that. That would just, I couldn't do it. I'm not claustrophobic, but I'm no tunnel rat, that's for sure. We also meet at this time Colonel Rutledge, who is a real pain in the keister. What is his problem? Why does he have such an issue? And it carries out through the whole movie, even to the very end. Why does he have such an issue with Woodward?
I think he just doesn't, he has some ideas and they might surpass or overbound his intellect of that situation, or
you mean more like, so a soldier's job is to carry a gun and go over the top? What are you doing down there in those tunnels? And does it make any sense to him, sort of thing?
Yeah, kind of. He didn't like that he might know something a little bit more or a little bit different than he did. He felt threatened, I believe.
Okay, that's an interesting take.
Sally's muted.
I totally agree with Lisa. I thought he was like jealous
Okay.
that the tunnel rats, shall we say, the miners had skill sets that he was totally alien to him. And he didn't believe it'd work because he didn't know about it.
Yeah, he certainly didn't think it would work. Even like I said, right up until the very end of the film, he was very dismissive of their efforts. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just thought of him as basically one of your unimaginative officers. I mean, he just didn't have any ability to see outside this narrow focus of whatever his experience was. And I think he probably would have had the same reaction if they weren't tunnelers. They would be somebody else that was, I mean, if somebody had come in with a new technology for fighting the war, I think he would have said, well, that can't work, because he lacked the imagination to see the possibilities.
And that was a huge problem in World War I. This war was a very technologically advanced war. Airplanes, machine guns, artillery. 20 years
Tanks.
prior to this war, tanks, yeah. 20 years prior to this war, none of that stuff had existed really. And this was the first time that those weapon systems were used on the battlefield. So I'm sure that there were quite a few officers who were holdovers from, the old guard, so to speak. that, you know, they just had this mindset, like Chris said, this is how you fight a war, and what you people are doing and what you people are bringing in here, that's not how we fight war. And so anything foreign, anything strange is dismissed. And similarly, kind of talking about the officers themselves, do you think this film portrayed World War I officers as we typically see them? And when I say that, you know, and maybe this is just how I see movies portraying them, but it's always that. It's always the unimaginative. You know, even if you get the craziest, most suicidal order, it's an order, you follow it. Do you think that this movie looked at the officers that they're portraying in that similar fashion?
I wanted
Go
to,
ahead, Lisa.
the people who were, I'm a little bit with Sally about the context, because I'm not as historically filled in that time.
Well, see, that's why you guys are supposed to spend weeks of doing research leading up to these movie nights, so you have all that information, and you can even, you know, you can even school me.
And then
I'm just kidding.
to see all the different forces there, and you're trying to figure out who's allies and who's, I mean, it's a little much for me, but I mean, who were the people digging that found out they were there and they were digging the shaft? Were those Germans? French?
There were Germans that found, well, it was the one German sergeant and his private that was with him. And the
Yes.
German sergeant, he didn't know for sure, but he suspected that
Okay.
that's what they were doing, and he was trying everything in his power to, you know, raise the alarms, raise the red flags, and thwart this effort by the Australians.
Okay, so his superior officer was similar
Mhm.
to the other superior officer. We didn't see him throughout the movie, but he didn't want somebody else telling him. He was just going to say, that's absurd, you know? So it was a very similar presence by the two superior officers. Now I forgot your question. Oh.
I just, you know, did the director, did he put the World War I officers out there? Did he portray them as we normally see them? The unimaginative, the, you know, very strict, very structured, very narrow-minded type of officer. Is that what we saw in this film?
And I think it's not very far. I know it's a completely different battle, but it's not very far from the Civil War, where you're just walking across the field being shot and bayoneted. So there's very strict structures to the way that the wars were fought. It's not like the war now. The Ukrainians, I would say, are very, very clever, and they're using their cleverness to overcome some of the obstacles they have with imbalance. But if they were in the same time and the same people, maybe they wouldn't be where they are today, because there's not I think we've transitioned from just walking into across the field and being shot down.
I mean, it's still brutal. It's still bloody. It's still, you know, a terrifying endeavor. But you're right. It's not that anymore, at least. and yeah, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was going to say, it was probably when World War II where, you know, the whole idea of fire and maneuver really took hold. And probably World War I was the teachable moment for why you needed that kind of change. I was going to comment on the officers. We didn't really see many officers.
We saw the German officer that Lisa was talking about,
right? And
he finally got clued in. He started to accept facts, and he started to do something. We saw Colonel Rutledge, certainly Woodward and his friend. I can't remember his friend's name, the one that we first met in the officer's shelter at the very beginning of the movie. But then there's also Major North. He was the Canadian officer who was in charge of the tunnel until Woodward showed up. And then I also can't remember the character's name, but he was above Colonel Rutledge at the end.
The general.
The general, yes.
Well, but what I was going to say is,
we did see a fair amount of officers. And the reason I asked this question was because aside from Colonel Rutledge and the German officer who did eventually start to get clued in, I thought this movie didn't treat the officers like we normally would see them treated.
Right.
I think that there was a bit of imagination within most of them, and some vigor and just some common sense, I thought.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was, I mean, with Major North, it was kind of hard to tell about him because he was on for so short a time. You really don't know what he would have been like commanding a group of people. I mean, it was almost more like, one of the enlisted people down there in the tunnel. The two that really stood out, I thought, were the German officer and Rutledge, because they were just so, they were the kind of overbearing kinds of officers that I think we're used to seeing. And I thought the general was kind of interesting because he seemed to be more open-minded to what was going on. I mean, he wasn't going to make a judgment, but he was willing to listen.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a bit of a relief, because a lot of times you see the generals also being kind of obstinate about many of these things.
Yeah, he even kind of shut down Colonel Rutledge once or twice as well, and I think that it kind of inspired Woodward a little bit. And just so everybody knows, I didn't mention this is all based on a true story. All these events, for the most part, really happened. So just to give some sort of context for everything. What was I just going to say as well? Shoot. Which
is really kind of weird to me when they come up at the end of the movie and they say, this is based on fiction. None of the characters should be taken as real, I mean, even when it's almost totally based on what actually happened.
Yeah. What was I just had another point to bring up that was going to spark another great round of discussion. No. Oh, yes. Chris, you did mention that maybe World War I was the impetus to see the change in World War II, as far as being able to adjust orders and adapt yourself to the situation, and not just take an order and go through with it. And you're absolutely right. Like I said, this was the last war where you had all those holdovers from the old style of warfare. And once this war ended and it really went back and took a look from a historical perspective at what happened, that's when you really start to see a change in the way armies function, not just ours, British, French, all of them, Germans, everybody. And how we operate on the battlefield now, today, is a direct result of World War I. We just cannot have blind orders followed to the absolute decimation of hundreds and thousands and millions of troops. You just can't have it anymore.
I think one of the interesting long tales of World War I was President Eisenhower with the interstate highways, based on his experience in World War I trying to move troops in the United States.
Yeah, no, there's and that's one of the reasons why I love studying World War I, because it had such an impact on so many things. Everybody just looks at how the map was reconfigured after that, particularly in the Middle East. But there's so many facets of World War I that still affect our lives today, more personally than a lot of people, usually tend to think about. And so I just find it just such a fascinating war. Not that war is a fascinating thing. I keep, saying it's not something that I glorify, but it is my job to study it and look at it and, try to build components of education off of it. So I'm kind of, I picked my own battle here. And now I really love studying World War I. Speaking of the officers and how they're all, set up, what about Lieutenant Woodward? What was his leadership style? Was he a leader? And did he change over the course of the film, or did you just see a steady Woodward all the way through?
I thought he became more assertive as the movie went on. I think when he first got there, he really didn't know exactly what he should be doing. I think he had a certain camaraderie with the troops he was leading, because again, there's similar skills and so on. but I did think he became a little more assertive, and you sort of got this sense of, I mean, at the very end when he decides whether he's going to throw the switch, and that's sort of like the point at which he becomes the officer who has to do what he has to do, even though he knows there's going to be a catastrophe for somebody that he likes and respects.
Yeah, I think that the storming and the blowing up of the Red House really, set him up well as as somebody that they looked up to, his platoon. You look up to an officer anyway because you have to, but I think after the Red House, it wasn't that they had to look up to anymore. He was a leader. He was somebody to follow. He volunteered to go out there. He volunteered to get right up in the German machine gun nests and blow this place up. And then when things went to pot, he quickly thought up a plan to fix it and correct it. And I just think it really showed his quality throughout the rest of the film. And then you're right, at the very end when he flips the switch, that scene just takes so long, and you can see in his mind he's thinking and he's thinking. And then I just love the way he's like, "Yep, throw it."
The Red House scene I thought also was kind of interesting because that was a scene where Fraser winds up kicking in the wall, and up to that point, Woodward had been kind of tapping away at it, as if, maybe I can get in, maybe I can get in. We'll take this one brick at a time, and Fraser just cuts through the whole thing. And I think that probably Woodward at that point realized that he had to be thinking more dramatically, in a sense, about how to do what he had to do as well.
Good. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Lisa, did you have something to say there?
When the officers come in, I have family in both places, enlisted and officer, so I got a little bit of when they come in, they have a role. The role is they've had leadership training, they have skills, but when you have mechanics or somebody and they have the skill set and they know how much time it takes or how much effort and you have somebody over here who doesn't really know that, but yet they're passing on these orders. Sometimes it's like, yeah, dude, really? But I think for Woodward, he had the skill set, so he could share in that, and that brought him a lot of respect, and he wasn't afraid to be in there. I mean, he was leading the guys. He was right up in the front,
Yeah, I suspect that in his civilian job, he was also a leader as well, not the same type of leader that we would see in a military unit, but he was the boss. And you have to think of work schedules and keeping your employees happy and keeping them safe and so on and so forth. And so I think by extension, that really helped him in his leadership role. And you're absolutely right. I was a sergeant. I was a dang good sergeant, if I don't say so myself. My son is an officer now, and I think he's a fantastic officer because I was able to tell him as he's going through all of his training and everything, listen to your sergeants. Listen to the people who know what they're doing. You're the leader, but you still have to know what's going on. And if you're deaf to the reality of the situation as people are telling it to you, you're not going to be an effective leader at all. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to have both. And Woodward possessed that in a single person as opposed to different people.
You can see in that scene that Rutledge didn't have that when he says, "You've got till the morning," or something like that, to do something that Woodward had said it's going to take like 3 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
You get that contrast.
Yeah, just listen to the experts. Listen to what they're telling you. If they say it can't be done, then change your plan. Don't just tell them to keep pushing forward.
To the point about Woodward's leadership style, I think another instance where you see how he relates to his troops is in the rugby game.
Oh, yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting to see how they played that, and how he fit in with the fellows on his team. And they actually had a rugby team on the other side.
I'd like to bounce off that real quick. So when they were, I think they were, no, they were in the hole, and they were setting that explosive charge in the cellar of the Red Barn. And he says, who do we have who's a runner? Were they talking about the future rugby game that they were going to play?
No,
Because they never brought him in to be the runner in that scene.
No, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I had the same thought. And then they did, if you weren't like specifically paying attention, about 5 minutes later, for about 3 seconds, then that whole line gets kind of lost. But they needed a runner to go in the trenches and bring out the firing mechanism so that the guy who was with them, the third guy who went back to get the firing mechanism, could bring it back out.
I thought the
And
guy
that
was okay. I thought
right,
the guy
yeah,
was
and the runner was
glasses
Billy
guy.
Bacon, is his character in the movie, which that character kind of made me think a lot about how we look at characters in films, and particularly since we're Americans and we really only kind of have that perspective. Billy Bacon, I don't want to cast any aspersions, but he looked Aboriginal to me, or
Yeah.
Aboriginal ancestry, and that's not something that we really would have picked up on, I guess, if we weren't paying close attention. And it got me to thinking about the other characters in the movie, and just how from different backgrounds you're going to have different peoples. And if you don't have any sort of knowledge or experience in those cultures or those backgrounds, you're not going to catch those small little obvious differences. And I just, not that I'm saying it's important or not. I just thought it was kind of interesting watching an Australian film, which it's not something that I normally do, and how Americans or even British or French or whoever might lose something out of it because we don't have those cultural identifications that they do. Just like they really wouldn't be able to really, pick out Native Americans or something like that if they're watching an American film, because it's not something that they have in their culture or their everyday lives.
And that transition, sorry, Chris, you want to go?
Go ahead.
That transition there where they were all huddled and they were talking about the left flank and everything. I thought it was military. I thought it was something they were going to do. And then it rolls into this rugby game. So I thought that was awesome. I love those kinds of little nuances in movies. I think they just really add a lot.
Excellent. Are you a rugby fan, Lisa?
I have never seen a rugby game. I've
seen it. I don't understand any of it, though.
I've heard about the slogans and everything, but I have not seen a rugby game in full. Little pieces.
I've watched a number of the Australian rules football rugby on some of the sports channels. I refer to it as Australian no rules football because it's pretty rugged. But back to Billy Bacon. That was one of the first things that caught me when his character came online. I thought, this guy looks Aboriginal. He doesn't, and I was really struck because it surprised me that in World War I, an Aborigine would be part of basically an Anglo unit because of the history of the terrible treatment that the Australians had visited on Aborigines. So I was thinking that he must be some extraordinary guy in order to have found himself in that situation. And I was a bit disappointed to see that was never developed as to how he wound up there and what particular skill it was that he had that made him so valuable to them that they would overcome these prejudices that Australians would have had towards an Aborigine.
I want to do a 10-second plug on a movie because Chris just made me think of it. I don't know if any of you watch Hoopla. It's the library. You get free, like 5 free streamings a month on a selection that they have. Check out your public library. Anyhow, there's a movie called Rabbit Proof Fence.
Oh, terrific movie. Excellent.
My gosh. I just loved it. And it's the history of the Aboriginal. It's historical about the Aboriginal peoples.
Right.
And so Chris made me remember that. And
Yeah.
it's The Rabbit Proof Fence. Excellent movie.
That's on my list of best movies I don't want to see again because it is so hard to watch.
And cinematography.
It's I saw it so long ago that it was on VHS.
No, thanks for that suggestion, Lisa. I'll definitely check it out. I
Terrific movie.
always like finding out new stuff, and especially if it gets a second from Chris, it's got to be good.
Well, and it's also based on fact. And as I recall, at the end of the movie, they show photos of the characters, the photos of the real characters, as they were at the time the movie was made. Because the movie was like, I don't know, the things that happened were like 30, 40, 50 years earlier.
Kind of like Schindler's List brought the people in at the end.
Okay. Oh, yes, Chris. You're right, talking about the Aborigines, serving right there shoulder to shoulder with the Anglos. We didn't see that in America, that kind of desegregation until after World War II. And really not even then. Maybe not even till we got toward Vietnam. Well, no, I guess we would have seen it in Korea as well, but certainly not until after World War II. So yeah, you're right. To see, the Australians having, for what it is or whatever it was anyway, that we see it, to have this kind of, desegregated system is kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the movie Glory, where a white officer was put in charge of the black unit, with no possibility of, white intermingling of white soldiers and black soldiers.
And then lastly, as we're talking about the differences in people, we seem to have kind of gone down that road, and that leads me right up to this last question perfectly. The Germans in the film. I read in an interview with Jeremy Sims that he didn't want to portray them as the enemy, so to speak. He wanted to portray them as regular people, just like the French, just like the Australians, just like the English. They didn't want to be there either. They have families back home who miss them, and things back home that they miss, just like everybody else did. They weren't this boogeyman, so to speak. And I was just curious if you caught that sense of it, and granted the scenes with the Germans weren't very, it didn't take up a lot of the movie, and the Australians, the way they talked about them, that didn't take up a lot of the movie either. But those sections that they did you see what Jeremy Sims was trying to do there, the director, in portraying them as people and not as the enemy?
I didn't know that was his intent, but I did feel that. As you could tell, I didn't even know, were they the French guys or the German guys? It sounded German to me, but yeah. No, they didn't seem like rats. They just seemed like people doing their jobs. So yeah, I felt that a lot. And I did want to say that I was in that if you ever get to England, go to the White Cliffs of Gibraltar, and they have a wonderful museum that's in the cliffs. I think it was actual, but they have it all automated. So like they have bacon sizzling in a room that might have been cooking it. It's like really cool.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Chris, did you want to? Oh, I thought you were getting ready.
I was kind of thinking about the movie about the Christmas truce in World War II, where suddenly you see the Germans and the Allied troops as people, as opposed to
different uniforms. That's it. And Lisa, I think the director Jeremy Sims would be very happy in the fact that you couldn't tell one from the other. That means that he did his job, at least as far as that goes, and not portraying them as the enemy. They're just people, just like everybody else. He'd be very satisfied to do that, I would think. We just have a couple minutes left. Of course, I always get to oh wait, I did want to ask one more question. Do you think that the side story of Oliver Woodward and Marjorie, do you think that was distracting, or do you think it really fit in well with the movie?
I don't think it was distracting. I don't think it particularly added a lot, but it did break up things to go back and forth. I thought it fit in okay. It had a good flow. All the characters, I don't know, they had an appeal to them. So sometimes if there's a scene like that and the character doesn't fit the spot, then it's like, why do they keep bringing this in? But it felt like it flowed okay.
Okay.
I didn't find it distracting. To a certain extent, I found it kind of a form of relief from the rest of what was going on. And I thought it was particularly, I don't know if anybody else got this, but in the scene where he meets up with Marjorie, we're at her workplace, and they kind of go behind the pillar or whatever it is, and she starts stroking his. In the background, the other women are watching her.
Oh yeah.
And one of them goes, this look of disbelief almost. So I thought it was a bit of a relief valve for everything else that was going on in the movie.
In addition to being for a few minutes and put you back in the open air in the daylight.
Yeah, and in addition to being true.
Yeah.
One quick. In the tunnel, when they asked that boy, how old are you? And he said he was 16. And it was like, oh, you're a youngster, you're 16. But that girl was 16.
Yeah.
You know? It's like.
Oh, don't, yeah. The way our minds work, Lisa, we rationalize things so really out of whack. I'm amazed that we have even made it this long as far as the male population goes.
Well, and I think it also, once again, illustrates the different expectations for men and women.
Exactly. I really enjoyed those cutaway scenes. I really like it when a film does a good job of juxtaposing the war, the battlefield, with the home front. And especially in this film, it wasn't just the home front, it was the emotions and the sentiments that were going on at the time as well. So I thought that not only was it a good portion of the movie, it was appealing and it fit well, but I think it was kind of important too, to show you what was going on while the men are fighting in Europe, what's going on back home as things are leading up to the war, and just the way just regular people feel about what's going on. We don't get that a lot. We've gotten it a couple times in some films, but it's not a aspect that we get too often. I'm a big fan of showing the home front and showing that juxtaposition.
Well, and you also, one of the other values of that kind of scene setting is that, at least subtly, it gives you the idea of why he really wanted to survive the war.
Yeah, he's got a motivation. He's got somebody to come home to now, as opposed to just his horse.
Yeah.
And so the last question to wrap this up, your favorite character and why? I'll start all the way down on the right with Sally, and we'll go Lisa, Chris.
I knew you were going to ask me this, and I don't have anybody tonight because they were all like a blur to me. Okay. I'm sorry.
Lisa?
I really thought Lieutenant Woodward did it. Like the character was very broad and he did well, and but my secondary character was Walt's father. I liked his story in the truck about the knitting. And
yeah.
And I liked that he was there to support his son, and I liked that character.
Yeah, it was a bummer that he died. Yeah. And you're right. When they were in the truck, I was like, that's a great little side story there of a father and son, serving at the same time like that. I thought that was really nice too. Chris?
I'd have to go with Lieutenant Woodward. I mean, he was the core of the movie. Without him, it really doesn't go anywhere. Of course, it was based on his diaries and whatnot, so it kind of makes sense. But I also liked as a secondary character Marjorie, because of the role she played in his life, and again providing him the motivation to make sure he came back. I thought it was kind of interesting when he says to her at one point, well, after Marjorie's parents decide to go for a walk, he said, and she says they've never done that,
Yeah, that
He
was
said-
cute.
He said, when I get back, I'll walk with you every day for the rest of your life, or something like that.
Yeah, that
So
was.
I thought she was an important character for him.
Very
Yeah.
cute.
And her role, I mean, you know, quite honestly, I think all the roles were well acted. I think Lieutenant Woodward or Captain Woodward, what have you, is probably, you know, my top character in there. Not only is the story about him, but I thought that Brendan Cowell did a really good job of creating the character as well. And then his acting, I thought, was superb. And I'll kind of feed off of Lisa. I'll pick a number 2 as well. I really like Sergeant Frazier. He was kind of like the glue of the movie up until the end. And I thought his role or his character was well acted also. You know, I'm gonna have to start looking for some of these actors in some other movies and find them. I'm not very familiar with Australian cinema, but maybe this movie is a reason to start to become familiar with it. Thanks everybody for showing up tonight. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say happy 4th of July.
Yeah, that's right. We won't see each other again until after the 4th. So yeah, everybody enjoy your Independence Day, or as we used to say at university, Ungrateful Colonist Day. That's history humor for you. And if I'm not mistaken, next month's movie is The Raid.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think that's right as well. And this will be a new movie to me, not one that I've seen. This has been a great year for these movies. It's really brought a lot of titles to my attention that you know, I just might have missed in the past. But we've discovered some really good films. I think we've discovered a couple stinkers too. But that's just what happens when you go and start watching new movies. So I look forward to seeing everybody this month. Hopefully we can get more people brought in.
I wish.
Still,
I want to add, speaking of movies, I saw a review of a new movie called Foxhole. I don't know if you've seen anything about this. It's probably not out on DVD or anything like that yet, but might be one to consider for next year if it's as good as the review seems to think. It basically takes the same characters and puts them in foxholes in different wars.
Oh, fascinating.
That might be an interesting take.
I just thought I'd bring that to your attention in case you hadn't heard of it. I haven't seen it. I don't know anything more than what I saw in a review. I think it was on the Roger Ebert site, but it sounded really intriguing. And I assume in the next month or 2 or 3, it'll be out on DVD or streaming or something.
Well, I will definitely check that out, Chris. Thanks for bringing that up. And dog, I swear.
Great movie. Thank you.
Always a
Thank you guys
fun
as well.
discussion.
And yeah, no, like I said, I was hoping to have more people, but honestly, we're only 5 of us sitting here. We could probably go on for another hour. It's always a joy talking with you folks and just talking with people that love movies as much as I do. So thank you very much for all of your contributions, and we'll see you in July.